In the vast expanse of the Nubian desert, where the golden sands stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in shades of amber and rose, there lived a people unlike any other known to the ancient world. The Blemmys dwelt in the heart of the wasteland, in a hidden oasis that had remained untouched by the footsteps of Roman legions or the caravans of distant traders. This was a place where time moved differently, where the very air seemed to shimmer with secrets older than memory. The oasis itself was a marvel to behold. Crystal-clear springs bubbled up from deep beneath the earth, their waters cool and sweet, surrounded by groves of date palms whose fronds swayed gently in the desert breeze. Flowering shrubs dotted the landscape in brilliant purples and whites, their perfume mixing with the warm scent of sand and sun-baked stone. At the center of this paradise stood ancient ruins, columns of weathered sandstone carved with hieroglyphs that told stories from a time when the world was young. It was here, in the shadow of these timeless monuments, that the Blemmys made their home. They were a proud people, though their appearance would have startled any traveler from the north. Where one might expect to see a head upon shoulders, there was instead a smooth expanse of chest, and it was there, upon the broad canvas of their torsos, that their faces resided. Eyes like pools of starlight gazed out from beneath strong brows, while mouths capable of both gentle laughter and fierce war cries rested where one might expect a heart to beat. The leader of the Blemmys was named Akay, a name that meant horizon in the ancient tongue. He was tall and powerfully built, his skin the color of burnished copper, marked with intricate tattoos that told the story of his lineage. His eyes held the wisdom of countless desert sunrises, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of one who had walked beneath the stars for more years than most could count. Akay stood now at the edge of the oasis, his gaze turned toward the north where the sands met the sky in an endless dance of heat and light. He had been having dreams lately, visions that came to him in the deep hours of the night when the desert was still and the stars burned bright overhead. In these dreams he saw strange men with pale skin and metal that gleamed like captured sunlight. They carried banners marked with the symbols of a great empire, and their eyes held the hunger of those who sought to claim what was not theirs. "The time of change approaches," I murmured to himself, his words carried away on the warm desert wind. Behind him, the sounds of his people went about their daily lives. Children playing in the shallows of the springs, elders sharing stories beneath the shade of the palms, craftsmen shaping clay and metal into objects of beauty and utility. It was a peaceful scene, one that had remained unchanged for generations beyond count. Yet Akay could feel the shift in the very air around him. The desert spoke to those who knew how to listen, and it was telling him that strangers would soon come to their hidden sanctuary. Not the usual desert wanderers or lost caravans, but something more dangerous. Those who would seek to understand what could not be understood, to possess what could not be possessed. The Blemmys had always been a people apart. Their ancestors had walked these sands when the great pyramids were still young, when the pharaohs ruled from their golden thrones along the Nile. They had learned to read the language of the wind and the stars, to find water where none seemed to exist, to make their homes in the spaces between the known and the unknown. They were the guardians of secrets, the keepers of stories that the outside world had forgotten or never known. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples, Akay made his way back to the heart of the oasis. The evening meal was being prepared. Dates and honey cakes, roasted meat from the herds of goats that thrived in the desert's embrace, and cool water flavored with mint and rose petals. The Blemmys gathered in the traditional circle, their unique faces glowing in the light of the cooking fires. There was Nebbit, the wise woman whose knowledge of healing herbs and ancient rituals was unmatched among their people. Her eyes held the depth of one who had seen both the beauty and the sorrow of the world, and her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of prophecy. Beside her sat Kenti, the master craftsman whose hands could shape metal and stone into objects of wonder, and whose knowledge of the old ways was surpassed only by his skill in creating new beauty from the raw materials of the earth. Young Ankh-Sekhmet, whose name meant "May he live for Sekhmet," was the swiftest of their scouts, able to traverse the desert like the wind itself. His eyes were sharp as a falcon's, and his feet had traced paths across the sands that would have been impossible for ordinary men to follow. He was the first to spot the approaching dust clouds on the horizon, the first to sense when the balance of their hidden world was about to shift. As the circle gathered and the evening prayers were spoken to the ancient gods who watched over the desert, Ake shared his vision with his people. He spoke of the dreams that had come to him, of the pale-skinned strangers who would soon arrive at their borders, of the choice that would soon face them all. The Blemmys listened in silence, their faces grave with understanding. "What would you have us do, Ake?" asked Nebbit, her voice soft as the desert wind. "Shall we hide deeper in the wasteland, seek sanctuary in the places where no foreign foot has ever trod?" Ake considered her words carefully. The desert was vast, and there were indeed places where even the Blemmys rarely ventured. Valleys hidden between impossible cliffs, springs that bubbled up from the earth only to vanish again into the sand, caves that led to chambers carved by the hands of gods. They could retreat to these places, could disappear entirely from the knowledge of the outside world. But something in his heart rebelled against such a choice. The Blemmys were not a people who hid from destiny. They were the children of the desert, born to stand beneath the open sky and face whatever challenges the world might bring. To hide would be to deny their very nature, to turn their backs on the role they had played in the great dance of existence since time began. "No," Ake said at last, his voice carrying the certainty of decision. "We will not hide. If these strangers come seeking us, they will find us. But they will find us on our own terms, in our own place, speaking our own truth. Let them come and see what they will see. Let them try to understand what they will understand." The night deepened around them, and one by one the Blemmys retired to their dwellings, simple but comfortable structures built from stone and clay, designed to stay cool in the heat of the day and warm in the chill of the desert night. But Ake remained by the dying fire, his eyes turned toward the stars that wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. He thought of the stories told by the elders, of the time when the world was young and all peoples lived in harmony with the earth and sky. He thought of the gradual change that had come over the centuries, as some turned away from the old ways and sought to bend the world to their will rather than living in balance with it. The Blemmys had chosen differently, had remained true to the ancient path, and now they were perhaps the last of their kind. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. The strangers would come or they would not. The world would change or it would remain the same. But tonight, in this moment of perfect peace, Ake felt the presence of his ancestors and the promise of future generations yet to come. The desert sang its eternal song, and he was content to listen. 7 days passed in the rhythm of desert life before the first signs appeared on the northern horizon. Enkidu Sekhmet had been making his morning rounds, climbing to the highest point of the ancient ruins to survey the vast expanse of sand that surrounded their oasis. When he spotted them, thin columns of dust rising in the distance, too regular and persistent to be natural wind formations. The young scout's heart quickened as he recognized the pattern. These were not the chaotic swirls of a sandstorm, nor the meandering tracks of desert animals. These dust clouds moved with purpose in formation, marking the passage of many feet and perhaps wheeled vehicles crossing the wasteland. He watched for several minutes, calculating their speed and direction, before climbing swiftly down from his perch to bring word to Akay. The leader of the Blemmys received the news with the calm that had served him well through many seasons in the desert. He asked careful questions about the size of the dust clouds, their direction, and the speed of their approach. Based on Enkidu Sekhmet's observations, he estimated that the strangers would reach the outer boundaries of their territory within 2 days. Perhaps 3 if they were traveling slowly or stopping frequently to rest. "Gather the council," Akay instructed, "and send word to all our people. Let them know that the time of decision has come." Within the hour, the Blemmys had assembled in their traditional meeting place, a natural amphitheater formed by weathered stone, where the acoustics carried even the softest voice to every listener. The youngest children sat wide-eyed as their elders discussed matters of great import, while the adults listened with the careful attention of those who understood that their next actions would shape the destiny of their people. Nebet, the wise woman, spoke first. Her voice carried the weight of prophecy as she reminded them of the ancient warnings passed down through generations of their people. The star readers of old spoke of a time when the world would grow small, she said, her words measured and deliberate. When the children of distant lands would seek to map every grain of sand, to name every star, to claim dominion over all that lives and breathes. They spoke of a choice that would come to all peoples, to bend the knee to these map-makers and namers, or to guard their secrets and risk being forgotten by the world. Kenti, the master craftsman, nodded gravely. His hands, skilled in shaping metal and stone, rested calmly in his lap as he considered the implications. "I have heard tales from the few traders who have found their way to our borders," he said. "They speak of a great empire to the north, one that seeks to bring all peoples under its rule. They offer protection and prosperity to those who submit, but they also demand tribute and obedience. They build roads where none existed before, and they record the names and locations of every people they encounter." Young Enkidu Sekhmet, still flushed from his swift journey back from the watchtower, added his own observations. "The dust clouds are too large to be a simple trading expedition," he reported. "I count at least 50 individuals, perhaps more, traveling with pack animals and what appear to be wheeled carts. They move with the discipline of soldiers, but they also carry the banners of scholars and scribes." This detail caused a stir among the assembled Blemmys. They had dealt with soldiers before, desert raiders and ambitious chieftains who sought to claim their oasis for themselves. Such conflicts were usually resolved quickly, one way or another. But scholars and scribes presented a different sort of challenge. These were people who came not to conquer through force of arms, but to conquer through knowledge. to study and record, and ultimately to reduce the mystery of the Blemmys to mere words on parchment. Ake listened to all these observations and concerns with the patience of one who had learned to weigh decisions carefully. The desert had taught him that hasty actions often led to regret, while thoughtful consideration usually revealed the best path forward. But he also knew that some decisions could not be delayed indefinitely. "We could withdraw to the deep desert," suggested one of the elders, a venerable Blemmys named Seneb, whose years of experience made his counsel valuable. "There are places known only to us, sanctuaries where no outsider has ever set foot. We could wait there until these strangers lose interest and depart." "And if they do not depart?" asked another. "If they establish a permanent camp and continue to search for us? Our oasis is the heart of our territory. To abandon it would be to abandon ourselves." The debate continued as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the stone amphitheater. Some argued for withdrawal, others for confrontation. A few suggested attempting to mislead the strangers, to send them searching in the wrong direction. But Ake found himself drawn to a different possibility, one that honored both the wisdom of caution and the courage of truth. "What if we were to meet them ourselves?" he proposed. "Not here in the heart of our sanctuary, but at the borders of our territory. We could learn their intentions, discover what they truly seek, and then decide how to respond based on knowledge rather than fear." This suggestion sparked intense discussion. The Blemmys had always been a cautious people, revealing themselves only to those who had proven their trustworthiness over time. To approach these strangers voluntarily would be to risk exposure, to chance that their unique nature would be recorded and spread throughout the world beyond the desert. But there was wisdom in Ake's proposal as well. By meeting the strangers on their own terms, the Blemmys would maintain some control over the encounter. They could choose what to reveal and what to conceal, could present themselves as they wished to be seen rather than as curiosities to be studied. Nebet, whose gift for seeing into the hearts of others had served their people well in the past, closed her eyes and let her inner vision guide her thoughts. When she opened them again, her expression was thoughtful but resolute. "I see two paths before us," she said, her voice carrying the authority of prophecy. "In one we hide and are eventually found anyway, our secrecy making us seem fearful and weak. In the other we step forward with dignity and strength, meeting these strangers as equals. The second path holds more risk, but also more honor." The council continued their deliberations as the day wore on, but gradually consensus began to emerge. They would indeed meet the strangers, but they would do so carefully and with preparation. A small group would venture out to make contact, while the rest of the people remained ready to defend their oasis if necessary. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ake made the final decision. He would lead a delegation consisting of himself, Nebet, Kenti, and Ankif and Sekhmet. For representatives of their people, each chosen for their particular skills and wisdom. They would travel to the spring of Kenti Min, a smaller oasis that lay along the probable route of the approaching strangers, and there they would wait. The evening was spent in preparation. Weapons were inspected and made ready, not with the intention of fighting, but with the understanding that the desert was a dangerous place where readiness could mean the difference between life and death. Food and water were gathered for the journey, along with gifts that might serve as tokens of peaceful intent should the strangers prove friendly. Most importantly, the 4 delegates spent time in meditation and prayer, seeking guidance from the ancient spirits that watched over their people. They burned sacred herbs and spoke the ritual words that would protect them on their journey, asking for wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to reveal truth and when to preserve mystery. As the night deepened and the desert grew quiet around them, Ake found himself once again contemplating the stars. Tomorrow would bring the first contact between his people and the outside world in many generations. The outcome would determine not just their immediate future, but the legacy they would leave for the children yet to be born. He thought of the stories told by the elders, of the time when the world was larger and more mysterious, when every valley held secrets and every people had their own unique gifts to offer. The approaching strangers represented a different vision of the world, one where everything was known and mapped and catalogued. Perhaps both visions could coexist, or perhaps one would inevitably overcome the other. Only time would tell. But whatever came, Ake was determined that his people would face it with dignity and courage, true to the ancient ways that had sustained them through countless generations in the heart of the desert. The journey to the spring of Kentimin took the better part of a day, following paths known only to the Blemmys through landscape that seemed barren to untrained eyes but held a wealth of secrets for those who knew how to read them. The 4 delegates traveled in the early morning coolness, their feet finding purchase on stone and sand with the sureness of those born to the desert. Kentimin was a modest oasis compared to their home, a cluster of palm trees surrounding a small pool fed by an underground spring, with enough vegetation to provide shelter and sustenance for travelers but not enough to support a permanent settlement. It had long served as a way station for the Blemmys, a place where scouts could rest and watchers could observe the movements of others across the vast expanse of the desert. They arrived as the sun reached its zenith, and immediately set about preparing their camp. Ake chose a position that would allow them to observe the approaches while remaining partially concealed among the palms. Nebet gathered herbs and prepared the ritual materials that might be needed for ceremony or healing. Kenti inspected the ancient markers that had been placed around the oasis by previous generations, ensuring that the protective symbols were still intact. Sekhmet climbed to a vantage point from which he could watch for the approach of the strangers. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part. Each of the 4 delegates dealt with the tension in their own way. Ake sat in quiet meditation, his breathing slow and steady as he prepared his mind for whatever was to come. Nebet busied herself with small tasks, organizing her materials and reviewing the ritual words that might be needed. Kenti worked on a small piece of metalwork, his hands finding comfort in the familiar motions of his craft. Sekhmet remained at his post, his eyes scanning the horizon with the patience of a true desert dweller. It was mid-afternoon when the dust clouds first became visible from their position. The strangers were approaching along the route that Sekhmet had predicted, moving with the steady pace of experienced desert travelers. As they drew closer, details began to emerge. The delegation could see that the group was indeed large, perhaps 60 individuals in total, including pack animals and wheeled carts pulled by oxen. Most significantly, they could see that these were not common raiders or traders. The strangers wore clothing that marked them as people of education and authority. Some carried scrolls and writing materials, others bore instruments of measurement and observation. Their leader, a man of middle years with sun-weathered skin and intelligent eyes, rode slightly ahead of the main group on a horse that had clearly been bred for endurance rather than speed. Romans, Kenty observed quietly, recognizing the style of their equipment and the organization of their expedition. But not soldiers. Scholars, as we suspected. Nebbit nodded, her inner sight providing additional information. The leader seeks knowledge above all else, she said. He is driven by curiosity rather than conquest. This could work in our favor, or it could make him more dangerous than a simple warrior. The strangers reached the oasis of Kenti Min as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon. They made camp with the efficiency of a well-organized expedition, establishing a perimeter and setting up their tents in orderly rows. Their leader, who was addressed by his companions as Marcus Aurelius, supervised the arrangements while examining the oasis with the careful attention of one trained in natural philosophy. It was clear that they intended to rest at the oasis for the night, perhaps longer if they found it suitable for their purposes. This presented the Blemmys with their first crucial decision: when and how to reveal themselves. They could wait until morning, observing the strangers' behavior and learning more about their intentions. Or they could approach now, while the Romans were still settling in and perhaps more receptive to unexpected visitors. They chose the middle path. As the Romans finished making camp and began preparing their evening meal, he stood and walked slowly toward the edge of the oasis where he would be visible to their sentries. He made no attempt to hide his approach, but neither did he move with the aggressive speed that might be interpreted as an attack. The reaction was immediate. The Roman sentries called out in alarm, and within moments the entire camp was alert and ready for action. Weapons were drawn but not raised in immediate threat. Marcus Aurelius himself stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his gladius but his posture more curious than hostile. "Hold," the Roman leader called out in accented but understandable Greek, the common tongue of educated men throughout the Mediterranean world. "State your business, traveler. Are you alone or do others accompany you?" Akay stopped at a respectful distance, his hands visible and empty of weapons. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of one accustomed to command. "Greetings, Marcus Aurelius of Rome. I am Akay, leader of the people of this desert. I come in peace with companions who wish to speak with you about your purpose in our lands." The Roman's eyes widened slightly as he took in Akay's appearance. Here was clear confirmation of the stories he had heard. A man with his facial features located in his chest, speaking with intelligence and dignity. Marcus Aurelius was a scholar and a natural philosopher, trained to observe and record the wonders of the world. But even he felt a moment of profound amazement at this first encounter with the legendary Blemmys. "You know my name," Marcus observed, his tone carefully neutral. "Yet I have not given it. How is this so?" "The desert has many ways of carrying information to those who know how to listen," Akay replied diplomatically. "We have watched your approach for several days. We know that you are not raiders or conquerors but seekers of knowledge. This is why we have chosen to meet you openly rather than remain hidden." At a gesture from Akay, the other 3 members of his delegation emerged from concealment and approached slowly. Marcus Aurelius and his companions stared in fascination as they beheld Nebbit, Kenty, and Ankh-ibn Sekhmet. Here was evidence that the stories told in Rome were not mere fantasy. The Blemmys were real, and they were clearly a people of intelligence and culture. Remarkable, breathed one of the Roman scholars, a thin man named Gaius Pliny who served as the expedition's naturalist. The accounts of Herodotus and the elder Pliny are confirmed. You are indeed the headless men of the southern desert. Nebbit spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a note of gentle correction. We are the Blemmys, children of the desert and keepers of the ancient ways. We are not headless, as you can see. Our faces are simply arranged differently than yours. The distinction was subtle but important, and Marcus Aurelius was quick to grasp its significance. These were not monsters or curiosities, but a people with their own identity and dignity. His response would set the tone for everything that followed. I apologize for my companion's choice of words, he said formally. We are honored to meet you, Ake of the Blemmys. I am Marcus Aurelius, sent by the Emperor to compile a comprehensive survey of the lands and peoples beyond the southern borders of our province. We seek knowledge and understanding, not conquest or treasure. And what form does this knowledge take? Asked Kenty, his craftsman's mind always interested in the practical details of any endeavor. Do you seek to map our territories, to count our numbers, to record our customs? Marcus Aurelius hesitated, recognizing the sensitivity of the question. We seek to understand, he said carefully. To learn how you live, what you believe, how you have adapted to this harsh environment. This knowledge will be recorded and preserved, shared with scholars throughout the empire for the advancement of human understanding. The four Blemmys exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way that comes from years of shared experience. They had expected something like this. The Roman desire to categorize and catalog, to reduce the mystery of the world to organized information. The question was whether such knowledge gathering was compatible with their own values and traditions. Knowledge can be a gift, said Nebbit thoughtfully, but it can also be a burden. Some truths are meant to be experienced rather than explained, lived rather than recorded. We are willing to share some of what we know, but we ask that you respect our need to preserve certain mysteries. Marcus Aurelius nodded slowly. As a scholar, he understood the value of both revelation and discretion. We seek only what you are willing to share, he assured them. We have no desire to force unwilling secrets from any people. The negotiations continued as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The Romans shared their evening meal with the Blemmys delegation, and in return were offered desert delicacies, dates stuffed with almonds and honey, tea brewed from herbs that grew only in the deepest wadis, and stories of the ancient days when the world was young and full of wonders. It was a tentative beginning, marked by mutual curiosity and cautious respect. Neither side revealed all their thoughts or intentions, but neither did they close the door to future understanding. As the night deepened and the desert stars emerged in their eternal dance, both groups settled into watchful rest, knowing that the morning would bring new decisions and new possibilities. The second day at Kentimin dawned clear and cool, with the promise of scorching heat to come as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. Both camps stirred to life with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to desert travel, though the Romans required more time and effort to organize their numerous supplies and equipment. Marcus Aurelius had spent much of the night in contemplation, weighing the unprecedented opportunity before him against the responsibilities of his mission. His instructions from Rome had been clear. Compile a comprehensive survey of the lands and peoples beyond the southern borders, with particular attention to any potential threats or opportunities for the empire. The Blemmys represented both. Their unique nature would fascinate scholars and administrators alike, but their evident intelligence and organization suggested they could be either valuable allies or formidable opponents. Ake, meanwhile, had communed with his ancestors through the ritual of dawn meditation, seeking guidance from the spirits that watched over his people. The voices of the past spoke to him of balance and wisdom, of the need to preserve what was essential while allowing for beneficial change. His people had survived in the desert for countless generations by adapting to new circumstances while maintaining their core identity. This encounter with the Romans would test that adaptability once again. The formal discussions began after the morning meal, with both leaders bringing their most trusted advisors to a shaded area beneath the largest palm tree. Marcus Aurelius was accompanied by Gaius Pliny, the naturalist, and Lucius Scribonius, a military engineer whose expertise in logistics had proven invaluable during the expedition. Ake brought Nebet, Kenti, and Ankivan Sekhmet, each representing different aspects of his people's knowledge and culture. "We have spent the night considering your request," Ake began, his voice carrying the formal cadence of diplomatic speech. "We are prepared to share certain knowledge with you, but we ask for knowledge in return. This should be an exchange between equals, not simply the recording of curiosities." Marcus Aurelius appreciated the diplomatic sophistication of the request. "What knowledge do you seek from us?" he asked. Nebet spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of a skilled healer. "We would learn of your methods of treating disease and injury. In our isolation we have developed certain skills in these areas, but we know there must be techniques known to your people that could benefit ours." Gaius Pliny leaned forward with interest. "Our expedition includes a trained physician," he said. "Quintus Servilius has studied in Alexandria and Athens, and he carries with him medical supplies and instruments that represent the best of current Roman knowledge. We would be honored to share this expertise." Kenti, the master craftsman, made his own request. "We have seen your tools and weapons, your methods of working metal and stone. We would learn of your techniques for creating objects of both beauty and utility. In exchange, we offer knowledge of working with the materials that the desert provides. Metals drawn from hidden veins, stones that possess unique properties, methods of preserving and strengthening materials in the harsh environment of the wasteland." Lucius Scribonius, the engineer, practically vibrated with enthusiasm. "The engineering challenges of desert survival must be immense," he said. "How do you find and preserve water? How do you construct buildings that remain cool in the heat and warm in the cold? How do you navigate across trackless wastes?" The exchange of practical knowledge continued throughout the morning, with each group sharing techniques and insights that had been developed through generations of experience. The Romans were fascinated by the Blemmys' ability to locate underground water sources, their methods of constructing dwellings that remained comfortable despite the extreme temperatures, and their techniques for preserving food in the desert environment. In return, the Blemmys learned of Roman engineering principles, of the construction of roads and aqueducts, of military tactics and organizational methods. They were particularly interested in the Roman system of writing and record-keeping, which allowed knowledge to be preserved and transmitted across vast distances and long periods of time. But it was when the discussion turned to matters of philosophy and belief that the most profound exchanges occurred. Ankivan Sekhmet, who had initially been quiet during the technical discussions, began to speak of the Blemmys' understanding of the desert as a living entity, of their belief in the interconnectedness of all things, and of their methods of reading the signs and portents that guided their decisions. "You speak of the desert as if it were a person," observed Gaius Pliny, his naturalist's mind intrigued by this perspective. "This is not merely poetry or metaphor, is it? To us, the desert is indeed alive," Ankivan Sekhmet replied, his young voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "It breathes with the wind, its blood flows in the underground streams, its moods change with the seasons and the stars. We do not seek to conquer it or control it, but to live in harmony with its rhythms." Ake considered the question carefully before responding. "We believe that all things are connected," he said. "The coming of your people to our lands was foretold in the patterns of the stars, in the behavior of the desert winds, in the dreams of our wise ones. We could have fought this destiny or hidden from it, but wisdom suggested that we should meet it with open hearts and minds." Nebbit added her own perspective. "Change is the nature of all things," she said. "The wise person learns to flow with change rather than resist it. But flowing with change does not mean abandoning one's essential nature. We seek to learn from you while remaining true to ourselves." The philosophical discussion continued as the sun reached its zenith and began its descent toward the western horizon. The Romans were fascinated by the Blemmys' holistic worldview, their integration of practical knowledge with spiritual understanding. The Blemmys, in turn, were intrigued by Roman concepts of law and governance, their methods of organizing large groups of people and maintaining order across vast territories. It was during this exchange that Marcus Aurelius made a decision that would have profound consequences for both peoples. "We had planned to continue south," he said, "to map the territories beyond this point and seek out other peoples who might dwell in the deep desert. But I find myself wondering if there might be value in a different approach." "What do you propose?" asked Ake, sensing the importance of the moment. "What if a small group of your people were to accompany us on our journey? Not as guides or servants, but as partners in the quest for knowledge. You could help us understand the lands we traverse, while we could share our methods of observation and record-keeping. And at the end of our expedition, some of our people could return with you to your home, to continue the exchange of knowledge over a longer period." The proposal hung in the air like the heat shimmer that rose from the desert sands. It was unprecedented, a formal partnership between the Roman Empire and a people who had never before appeared in any official records. The implications were staggering, both for the immediate participants and for the broader relationship between the civilized world and the mysterious peoples of the deep desert. Ake looked to his companions, reading their thoughts in the subtle expressions that passed across their unique faces. Nebbit's eyes held a mixture of excitement and caution. The healer in her recognized the potential benefits of expanded knowledge, but the wise woman understood the risks of too much openness. Kenti's craftsman's mind was already working through the practical details of such an arrangement. Ankivan Sekhmet's youthful enthusiasm was tempered by the scout's natural wariness of unknown territory. "Such a partnership would require careful planning," Ake said finally. We would need to establish clear understandings about what knowledge could be shared and what must remain private. We would need assurances that your people would respect our customs and beliefs, just as we would respect yours. Marcus Aurelius nodded enthusiastically. Of course. We would draft a formal agreement, witnessed by both our peoples and sanctified by whatever rituals you consider appropriate. This would be a partnership of equals, not a relationship of domination. The negotiations continued into the evening, with both sides working through the complex details of such an unprecedented arrangement. Questions of language, logistics, cultural sensitivity, and mutual protection were discussed and resolved. Gradually, the framework of an agreement began to emerge, one that would allow for the exchange of knowledge while preserving the essential character of both peoples. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the two groups shared another meal together. The atmosphere was different from the previous evening, less cautious, more hopeful. The Romans and Blemmys sat together in mixed groups, sharing stories and laughter as they began to see each other not as strangers but as potential friends and allies. Gaius Pliny found himself in deep conversation with Nebet about the medicinal properties of desert plants, while Lucius Scribonius sketched detailed diagrams of Blemmys' construction techniques under Kenty's patient guidance. Ancit and Sekhmet regaled a group of young Roman soldiers with tales of desert survival, while Marcus Aurelius and Achae continued their philosophical discussions under the star-filled sky. It was a moment of perfect harmony, a glimpse of what might be possible when different peoples approached each other with respect and genuine curiosity rather than fear or prejudice. The desert around them seemed to approve, its evening breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers and the promise of cool, refreshing rest. But even as they celebrated this new understanding, both leaders knew that the real test lay ahead. It was one thing to reach an agreement in the relative safety of a neutral oasis, quite another to maintain that agreement when faced with the challenges and pressures of the wider world. The partnership they were forging would be tested by distance and time, by the reactions of their respective peoples, and by the inevitable misunderstandings that arise when different cultures attempt to work together. Yet both Marcus Aurelius and Achae felt a deep sense of optimism as they settled down for the night. They had proven that understanding was possible, that the barriers between peoples could be crossed through patience, respect, and genuine goodwill. The third dawn at Kentyman brought with it a sense of momentous change. The agreement hammered out during the long discussions of the previous day had been formally ratified with ceremonies that honored both Roman legal tradition and Blemmys spiritual custom. Marcus Aurelius had signed the document with the elaborate seal of his imperial authority, while Achae had blessed it with sacred water from the deepest spring of their homeland and marked it with the ancient symbols of his people. The partnership that emerged from these negotiations was unlike anything either civilization had previously attempted. Two representatives from each group would cross into the other's world. Ancit and Sekhmet and Nebet would accompany the Roman expedition as it continued its survey of the southern territories, while Gaius Pliny and a young engineer named Titus Flavius would return with Achae and Kenty to experience life among the Blemmys. The morning was spent in final preparations and farewells. The Romans reorganized their supplies to accommodate their new companions, while the Blemmys prepared ritual protections for those who would be venturing into unknown territories. There was an air of excitement mixed with apprehension as both groups prepared to embark on this unprecedented experiment in cooperation. Ankh-Sekhmet stood at the edge of the oasis, his keen eyes surveying the route that the Roman expedition would take. At 19 years old, he was the youngest of the Blemmys delegation, but his skills as a scout and his natural curiosity about the world beyond the desert made him an ideal choice for this mission. He had spent the previous evening learning basic Latin phrases from the Roman soldiers, while teaching them some of the hand signals and tracking techniques that were essential for desert survival. Nebet, meanwhile, had been deep in consultation with Quintus Servilius, the Roman physician. Their exchange of medical knowledge had revealed fascinating parallels between Roman and Blemmys healing practices, as well as significant differences in approach and philosophy. The Roman reliance on written texts and standardized procedures contrasted sharply with the Blemmys' tradition of intuitive diagnosis and individualized treatment, but both recognized the value of the other's methods. "Your people have learned to listen to the body's own wisdom," Quintus had observed. "Our methods sometimes impose solutions rather than allowing natural healing to occur. Yet your systematic approach ensures that knowledge is preserved and improved upon," Nebet had replied. "Our traditions are strong, but they can be lost if not properly transmitted to the next generation." The exchange had been so productive that both healers were eager to continue their collaboration during the journey ahead. Nebet had prepared a collection of desert herbs and minerals that would allow her to continue her healing work while traveling, while Quintus had shared copies of his medical texts written in Greek, which Nebet had been delighted to discover she could read thanks to her people's ancient connections to the scholarly traditions of Alexandria. On the other side of the partnership, Gaius Pliny was practically vibrating with enthusiasm at the prospect of studying Blemmys society from within. As a naturalist and ethnographer, he had spent years observing and recording the customs of various peoples throughout the empire, but he had never before been invited to live among a people as their guest and student rather than as an outside observer. "This is an unprecedented opportunity," he told his companion Titus Flavius as they prepared for departure. "We will be the first Romans to witness the daily life of the Blemmys, to understand their customs and beliefs from the inside. The accounts we produce will be invaluable for future relations between our peoples." Titus Flavius, a practical young man trained in engineering and construction, was more focused on the technical aspects of what they might learn. "Their desert architecture alone could revolutionize our understanding of building in harsh environments," he said. "If we can understand their methods of temperature control and water conservation, we could apply those techniques throughout the empire's southern provinces." The moment of departure arrived with the sun still low in the eastern sky, the desert air cool and fresh with the promise of the day to come. The two groups prepared to go their separate ways, each carrying with them the hopes and expectations of their respective peoples. Marcus Aurelius clasped hands with Achae in the Roman manner, while Achae touched his forehead to the Roman's chest in the gesture of respect traditional among the Blemmys. "May the gods watch over you and your people," Marcus said formally. "May this partnership bring wisdom and prosperity to both our civilizations. May the desert winds carry you safely on your journey," Achae replied. "And may the knowledge you gain serve the cause of understanding rather than conquest." The Roman expedition set off toward the south, their long line of pack animals and carts raising a cloud of dust that was visible long after they had disappeared beyond the horizon. Anthropology rode near the front of the column, his desert-trained eyes scanning the landscape for signs that his Roman companions might miss. Nebet traveled in one of the carts, her precious collection of herbs and healing supplies carefully protected from the dust and sun. Meanwhile, Ake and Kenti prepared for their own journey back to the heart of Blemmys territory, accompanied by their Roman guests. The route they would take was known only to the Blemmys themselves, following paths that had been used by their people for countless generations. It would be a journey of revelation for Gaius Pliny and Titus Flavius, as they traveled deeper into the desert than any Roman had ever ventured. The first day's travel took them through landscape that gradually became more rugged and spectacular. The flat expanses of sand gave way to rocky outcroppings and deep wadis carved by ancient floods. Hidden springs appeared in places that seemed impossibly barren, their presence revealed only by the subtle signs that Kenti pointed out to his fascinated Roman companions. "The desert keeps its secrets well," Gaius Pliny observed, making notes in his journal as they rested in the shade of a towering cliff. "A casual observer would see only wasteland, but you have shown us gardens hidden in the rocks, water flowing beneath the sand, life thriving in what appears to be desolation." Kenti smiled, pleased by the Romans' growing appreciation for his homeland. "The desert teaches patience," he replied. "It rewards those who take time to observe and understand, but it is harsh to those who try to force their will upon it." As they traveled deeper into Blemmys territory, the landscape began to change in ways that seemed almost magical to the Romans. The very air grew cooler and more humid, carrying scents of flowering plants and running water. The colors of the rocks shifted from the browns and tans of the outer desert to rich reds and purples, with veins of precious metals visible in the cliff faces. "We are approaching the heart of our homeland," Ake explained as they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley that took the Romans' breath away. Below them stretched an oasis of impossible beauty, crystal-clear lakes reflecting the sky, groves of date palms and flowering trees, and in the distance, the ancient ruins that had been the spiritual center of Blemmy civilization for countless generations. But it was the people who truly amazed the Roman visitors. As word of their arrival spread through the settlement, Blemmys of all ages emerged from their dwellings to welcome the strangers. Children ran alongside the travelers, their unique faces bright with curiosity. Elders emerged from the shade of their homes to offer formal greetings. Craftsmen paused in their work to observe the unprecedented sight of Romans in their homeland. What struck Gaius Pliny most profoundly was the sense of harmony that pervaded the community. Despite their unusual appearance, the Blemmys moved and interacted with a grace and dignity that reminded him of the best aspects of Roman society. Their dwellings were simple but beautifully constructed, their gardens were carefully tended, and their social interactions were marked by respect and consideration for others. "Your people seem remarkably peaceful," he observed to Ake as they were welcomed into the leader's home. "In all our travels, we have rarely encountered a society so free from visible conflict or tension. Conflict exists among us as it does among all peoples," Ake replied honestly. "But we have learned that survival in the desert requires cooperation. Those who waste energy in pointless disputes do not live long in this environment." The Romans were given comfortable quarters in a guest house that had been prepared for important visitors. The building was a marvel of desert architecture, its thick walls and ingenious ventilation system keeping the interior cool even during the heat of the day. Fountains played softly in the central courtyard, their sound masking conversations and providing a constant reminder of the precious water that made life possible in this harsh environment. Over the following days, Gaius Pliny and Titus Flavius were gradually introduced to the full complexity of Blemmys society. They observed the council meetings where important decisions were made through careful consensus building rather than authoritarian decree. They witnessed the elaborate rituals that marked important transitions in life: birth, coming of age, marriage, and death. They learned about the sophisticated system of water management that allowed the oasis to support a population much larger than its apparent resources would suggest. Most importantly, they began to understand the philosophical foundations that underlay Blemmys culture. The concept of balance between individual and community, between tradition and innovation, between taking from the environment and giving back to it, permeated every aspect of their society. They have achieved something remarkable, Titus Flavius confided to his companion as they sat in their courtyard one evening, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They have built a civilization that seems to be in perfect harmony with its environment. There are lessons here that could benefit the entire empire. Gaius Pliny nodded thoughtfully. Yet I wonder if their methods could be transplanted to other environments and other peoples. What works in the desert might not work in the forests of Germania or the cities of Gaul. Perhaps not directly, Titus agreed. But the underlying principles, cooperation, respect for the environment, careful use of resources, these could surely be adapted to other circumstances. As the weeks passed, both halves of the great experiment continued to unfold. Far to the south, Ankiv and Sekhmet and Nebet were learning about Roman methods of exploration and documentation, while sharing their own knowledge of desert survival and navigation. Their presence had proved invaluable to the expedition, helping the Romans avoid dangerous terrain and locate sources of water that would have been impossible to find without local knowledge. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Blemmys homeland, the Roman visitors were documenting everything they observed with the systematic thoroughness that was the hallmark of their civilization. Their journals filled with detailed descriptions of Blemmys architecture, agriculture, craftsmanship, and social organization. They made careful drawings of tools and techniques, interviewed elders about history and tradition, and slowly began to piece together a comprehensive understanding of this unique culture. The partnership was not without its challenges. Language barriers led to occasional misunderstandings, and cultural differences sometimes created tension. The Roman emphasis on written records and formal procedures sometimes clashed with the Blemmys' preference for oral tradition and intuitive decision-making. But both sides approached these difficulties with patience and goodwill, recognizing that such problems were inevitable when two very different cultures attempted to work together. As the season turned and the time approached for the exchange to end, both groups had gained far more than they had originally hoped. The Romans had documented not just the customs and appearance of the Blemmys, but had gained insight into an entirely different way of organizing society and relating to the natural world. The Blemmys had learned valuable techniques for preserving and transmitting knowledge, as well as methods of engineering and organization that could benefit their own people. But perhaps most importantly, both peoples had discovered that understanding was possible across even the greatest cultural divides. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable, differences in appearance, language, religion, and worldview, had proved to be bridges rather than walls when approached with respect and genuine curiosity. The formal conclusion of the partnership was marked by elaborate ceremonies that honored both Roman and Blemmys traditions. Documents were signed and sealed, gifts were exchanged, and promises were made for continued cooperation in the future. The Roman expedition would return to the empire with unprecedented knowledge of the southern desert and its peoples, while the Blemmys would continue to benefit from the techniques and perspectives they had learned from their Roman guests. As the final farewells were said and the two groups prepared to return to their separate worlds, there was a sense that something historic had been accomplished. The age-old pattern of suspicion and conflict between different peoples had been replaced, at least in this one instance, by cooperation and mutual respect. The desert wind carried the sound of their voices across the vast expanse of sand and stone, a testament to the possibility of understanding between all peoples, no matter how different they might appear on the surface. In the end, the greatest discovery made by both Romans and Blemmys was not about geography or technology or even culture, but about the fundamental unity that underlies all human diversity. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, the same stars that had watched over the first meeting at Kentimin and would continue to shine long after the last echoes of this historic encounter had faded into legend. But the knowledge gained, the friendships forged, and the understanding achieved would endure as a testament to what was possible when different peoples approached each other with open hearts and minds.